Well, hello there, goblins and ghouls. Welcome to part two of episode 15 of the Quadruple D. And this final segment is what I call the fetid fever dream flashback of the week because we talked about Matt Gaetz and his illustrious career. Now we're going to move on to talk about one of Matt Gaetz's public enemies, Kevin McCarthy. And the biggest scandal that was a part of Kevin McCarthy's career. So, in case you forgot who Kevin McCarthy is, well, for one thing, I'm jealous if you were able to forget that, but he is the former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, and the biggest scandal likely centers on his handling of the January 6th Capitol riot and his shifting positions on Donald Trump's role in it, alongside his maneuvering for political power at the expense of principle. So, the scandal, the core issue, is that in the immediate aftermath of the January 6th, 2021 insurrection, McCarthy condemned Trump, saying he bore responsibility for the violence. But within weeks, McCarthy reversed course, visiting Trump at Mar a Lago and publicly renewing support for him, sort of like a little bitch boy. And this flip flop looked like a clear calculation for power more than any sort of principle. McCarthy likely believed he needed Trump's base to eventually become Speaker. Critics saw it as moral cowardice, which it was. The critics were certainly correct. And he was placing personal ambition above democratic accountability or truth. And when I say democratic accountability, I'm not referring to the political party, just to be clear. I'm referring to the general premise of democracy. McCarthy also resisted efforts to form an independent commission to investigate the attack, further cementing the idea that his priority was party unity and political survival, not truth or justice or any lofty concept like that. As so often happens, the party of law and order actually, oddly enough, exemplifies the common critiques of power one might find in an anarchist perspective. So what do I mean by that? Well, whether you are an anarchist or not, or have any, you know, fellow traveler elements regarding anarchism, um, from an anarchist lens, especially when critical of both state authority and capitalist power structures, McCarthy's behavior fits into a broader critique. You have the power over principle dynamic unfolding. His shift wasn't about ethics or truth, it was a survival tactic in a hierarchical system where power and loyalty to other power figures like Trump outweighs accountability. So, uh, an anarchist or a radical similar to one might say this is what the state always does, protects itself and not the people. Well, what do you know? That critique actually seems to be accurate in this case, right? So you also have the illusion of choice angle because at the end of the day, McCarthy's scandal shows how little difference there is between supposed political side or sides when the chips are down. Even after a violent assault on their own institution, establishment politicians quickly reverted to protecting their structure. To stereotypical anarchists, this reinforces the idea that representative democracy is an illusion of control, not real power for the people. And, in a way, even the Democratic Party represents that sort of view because even though they are supposed to be the opposition to Trump and all that kind of stuff, At the end of the day, what did they actually do in response to the January 6th attack and all of these related crimes? And of course, other crimes that Trump was accused of. Well, they got Merrick Garland to be ultra slow in addressing any of those issues. So Donald Trump ultimately got away with any sort of crimes that he was, known to have committed. And in fact, some of the crimes he was accused of, Donald Trump actually admitted to committing. So it's kind of funny how this is, depicted as some sort of witch hunt and all that when, if anything, it was just the lack of accountability on display in many respects because Donald Trump, in many cases, actually admitted to the things that he was being accused of, which were, in many cases, crimes. Like in addition to January 6th, you had all those boxes full of documents that he was storing at Mar-a-Lago. That was something that he admitted to doing, in which if anybody else had done it, it would be a crime for which they would have been sentenced to many years in prison. Because, I mean, keep in mind, if if a lot of us did that sort of thing, we would not have the benefit of the doubt. And the government, in fact, actually does give them the benefit of the doubt, right? The government gave Donald Trump like a year or so, maybe even longer than a year, to give all of those boxes of documents back. But he still was not doing that. And, it's so what does that really tell you? He was intentionally trying to hang on to those documents and intentionally defying the law. It would be a little bit different if he was just fully cooperating, like what happened with Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton or, you know, maybe a few other cases here and there. They were actually cooperating, and when you cooperate with the government in a criminal investigation, they tend to be a little bit more lenient. They will usually make note of that, and it might even help you get a reduced sentence, not just when it comes to, the mishandling of documents or whatever, classified information, but, when it comes to other crimes, crimes in general, including even murder, if you cooperate in a murder case, they might actually not throw the whole book at you or something like that. If you confess to your crimes and you might be able to plead for a reduced sentence or something like that. They might even drop a charge or two. That's pretty much common knowledge, right? So the uh, the Orange Menace had the opportunity to do that, and he didn't. But because Merrick Garland was such a weakling, he slow walked all of these investigations and things that could have most certainly been done at least a little bit quicker. They just totally dropped the ball with them, and so Trump was able to get away with those crimes. Now he's getting away with additional ones, of course, and that's the extent of the Democratic Party's supposed witch hunt that we keep hearing on. And ironically, of course, like when somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene accuses others of engaging in a witch hunt, it's funny because if there were actual witch hunts, the people like Marjorie Taylor Greene would be the first ones to throw gasoline on the fire to burn some actual witches because these people are, they're freakazoids. They believe in things like witches and demons and whatever, that they would actually engage in real witch hunts against people, even putting aside some of these, figurative ones, the non literal ones. I could fully imagine somebody like Pastor Greg Locke, having a huge pyre with accused witches burning in them, because that's really the dangerous road that superstition can lead down. I've talked about the possibility of actual witch trials happening again and making resurgence, and we're not necessarily that far from it. I know it sounds like I'm veering off topic severely here, but oddly enough, it all does kind of tie into this critique of power. You put power in unaccountable hands, and in the hands of people who believe in these superstitious things, and you can have some pretty dangerous results. And it's not just people sometimes getting away with crimes. It's the sort of wacky beliefs you might end up with that are part of the system of, I guess, punishment, divine retribution in a way, because at the end of the day, you might have some people who believe that germs are actually demons or something like that. Maybe if somebody has a mental illness, they're possessed by a demon, or they could accuse somebody of what was that with the whole COVID thing, like the the diabo- the diabolical plot to put microchips into the shots or whatever. You get a shot in your arm, and they think they're putting microchips in your body or something. Not that that would necessarily be impossible with the advent of microtechnology, but of course there's no evidence for it. That's like the difference between what we know to be true and what we know to probably be untrue, is just whether or not there's evidence for something. And what's really happening here in this bizarre era of politics is you're really having the sort of reassessment of whether or not truth matters. And it's a freakish time to see all this stuff going on. And in addition to, the possibility of having witch trials, you have these actual genocidal campaigns going on, against the people of Gaza and whatnot, just deliberately starving people to death, and, bombing all of their hospitals and killing aid workers and journalists and all that kind of stuff. And Trump is referring to Gaza as property, or real estate, I guess is the term that he likes to use. And he's making very clear that the aim there is to just ethnically cleanse the area. So you've got the danger of, unaccountable government, a government that no longer even cares about the law, even though it's proclaiming itself as part of the party of law and order. And you have all these superstitious beliefs and corruption and just genocidal and uh, territorial expansionist interests happening. They're all blending together. And, you have to wonder, is this really what people power is supposed to look like? Well, I would hope not, because that would mean that most of the people are rotten, you know? And of course, another dynamic would be that the state protects itself. That would be another thing that a sort of radical anarchist or whatever would say is happening here. McCarthy's resistance to a serious investigation, at least at first, into January 6th, shows how the state acts to preserve its legitimacy, even if it means obscuring truth or allowing injustices to go unanswered. It's not about justice, it's about maintaining order and control. and of course, control of the narrative. So if you allow things to be investigated, if you allow contradictory evidence to make it into the public eye, it's a little bit harder to control any narrative because the truth tends to shine a light on darkened places. And of course, you have the reinforcing of authoritarianism. By backing Trump again, McCarthy helped normalize authoritarian rhetoric and far right behavior within the GOP, which of course can lead to normalizing authoritarian policies. So, from sort of an anarchist view, this accelerates the danger of fascist tendencies within the state, especially when paired with increasing surveillance, police powers, and repression. So, McCarthy's biggest scandal isn't just hypocrisy, it's a case study in how state power protects itself, rewards loyalty over truth, and undermines its own supposed democratic principles to maintain control. Uh, an anarchist wouldn't be surprised. They'd call it proof the system isn't broken but working exactly as designed. And in this case, it's designed poorly and with a bunch of batshit crazy ideas tossed into the mix. So that's why the whole thing with Kevin McCarthy is a fetid fever dream, flashback of the moment, and really shows what kind of person he is. So just because he had this feud with Matt Gaetz and whatnot, it doesn't really let Matt Gaetz or Kevin McCarthy off the hook. You know, they were just at odds with each other over these personal differences. You know, they were scumbags in somewhat different ways, I guess. And they had a power clash. You know, you had two belligerent personalities clashing with each other. And if on the bright side, it did create a bit of entertainment, I suppose, in a sort of dark sense, like, you know, messed up developments can be entertaining. It was a bit of drama, but at what expense? I guess that's really the question.